Hello and welcome. It is Deb and Bec and welcome to our YouTube show. We are really excited, and as always we have got a great show with you. We've got a question, what to do when my thoughts look real, and our topic is going to be conflict resolution and resilience. I thought I wasn't going to get my tongue around that. And then obviously we're going to share with you what we've been living and learning this week.
Yes.
But before we dive into all that, as always, we like to tell you a little bit about what we're getting up to. And this week I wanted to share with you that our relationship school that we did a few weeks ago, it's just finished now, is actually moved into summer school. So if you want to join summer school in relationship school, you can do that. We'll make sure that there's a link below this, wherever you see it. We'll make sure there's a link below it so that you can go and find out about that. And yeah, we've been working on that. We've been doing some really fun stuff behind the scenes, as always. And we've got some great stuff in there in relationship school, in summer school for you. So if you want to join that, it would be absolutely great to have you with us.
Yeah, and if you want to know a bit more about kind of what we share and how we share before you get into summer school, next week from Monday the 22nd, we're doing one of our famous 5-day challenges. So we're doing a 5-day self-love challenge starting Monday the 22nd of June. And all you have to do is be on our mailing list to get those challenges, those challenge emails. So if you're not on our mailing list, you can go and sign up. We'll make sure there's a link below so you know where to go. If you are on our mailing list, you'll get those emails anyway, but you can join in our Facebook group as well, because we kind of interact on there. And that gives you like a little taste of what we share, how we work, what we're pointing to. It's a great fun 5 days to just hang out in this conversation. And then off the back of that, when you're ready, you can then go and sign up and join in with summer school, because it would be amazing to have you there.
Absolutely, that would be brilliant. Cool. So let's get started today. So our living and learning. Well, I think if you are in our Facebook group or you've been around us at all, you know, if you follow us and you're up to date with what we're up to, you will probably know that my son had an amazing shift. It's been a bit of an ongoing thing for him. I think he's had some little shifts and some little changes, but he's been around this conversation. Obviously, he's been living with me ever since I came across. He doesn't live with me anymore, but you know, he was living with me right from the start when this all happened to me, and he obviously saw a huge change in me. And he got a little bit curious about what was going on, and he was dipping in and out of the conversation. And then as we went into lockdown, he was struggling a little bit with various things. As you know, it was a huge change for a lot of us, wasn't it? And some things to get our head around. And he was struggling a little bit with a few things. And so we were having I was in regular contact with him and having regular conversations with him. And then as the lockdown eased a little and we were allowed to go for walks, we were going for some social distancing walks, and that was absolutely beautiful. And something huge just began to shift for him. And it's just been one of those amazing times when you see someone who just their whole face looks lighter, their whole body looks lighter, everything is just, there's nothing different about him, and yet everything has changed. And you can really see where those kind of things, where those sayings come from. When people say that, you can see somebody, and I can see he's still absolutely who he was, what he was, everything. Nothing has changed, and everything is different. And it's just such a delight and a pleasure to be around him now, to talk to him, to have conversations with him. Not that obviously he's my gorgeous son, and it always was, but there's just something, I don't know, Bec, do you want to jump in, and what have you seen? What
I mean, I don't know, because I haven't, it feels like it's been months since we've kind of hung out really. And when he was here visiting the other day, and yeah, you can just, I don't know, his energy just feels different. He just feels calmer. It's like a surface calm that he used to have, and you can feel that underneath the surface there's a calm now that wasn't there before. And I think, kind of from my point of view, I think that the thing that I have watched is just you coming back to your grounding around this time and again, when he would ring up with a problem from work or a relationship, so whatever might have been going on for him, and he'd perhaps be up in his head or upset or angry, and I just watched you time and again go to your grounding, find your wisdom, find your okayness, and speak to him from there. And it just, like it spoke volumes that he kept coming back and asking you, you know, he would ring and go, this has gone on, I need you to talk at me, I need you to share what you share, I need you to tell me what you know that's helpful. And it just kind of, yeah, for me that just said everything, that he knew he could come to you. And whenever that kind of stuff, because I think what we very easily do, particularly when it's our closest people, like they seem to be a blind spot, don't they? Family
they can be.
Or,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we sort of have a hub of people that are our blind spot almost. And I think what I kind of watched you do was be entirely out of the story of him being a blind, and you were just like, he's just a person with his own wisdom who falls into the trap of believing his thinking, and can act from there. What would I say to any other person? Do exactly the same.
He's been great learning for me to see that, because I know, like, we share that everybody has their own wisdom. And when we have a story of someone, like a child or our partner, or very often we hear people say, oh, you know, I need my mom to get this, or I need my sister to hear this, or I need my daughter to, whatever it is, it's really easy for us to hold on to our own story of this person needs to hear something, this person needs to be different. And he's been a gift for me to step back and allow him the space to find his own wisdom. And like you say, it was lovely that he would come to me, and I could see that he knew there was something here, but he maybe not what. And every time he kind of stumbled or whatever, he would come and ask. But yeah, it was very much the getting out of that story, that he has to see this, and that his wisdom, because very often, you know, his wisdom wasn't what I would have told him to do.
Quite.
Our nearest and dearest can often have quite a different path from us, can't they? And actually kind of walking my talk, I guess, listening to myself and sort of, you know, what would you say to someone else? That person, however much it doesn't look to you in that moment, that person has their own wisdom. Allow them the time and the space to follow that wisdom. So if you're in that place at the moment, if you're watching this and kind of going, yeah, but if my mom did get it, or my sister did get it, or whoever your person is, if they did get it, and very much the whole relationship thing, I know a lot of people can get stuck in their head with, I know this, but my partner needs to know this. Or if I'm in a relationship with somebody, it will only really work if they know this as well. And obviously we started this with my living and learning, and I'm kind of saying I'm absolutely overjoyed that my son has got this. But one of the main reasons I'm so overjoyed is for him. I can just see
difference in his life.
But I can also see he was always okay before this, and it was that, really. I think it's one of those, isn't it? It can be difficult to. And
I think even if you're listening and it's not for you, it's not about a family member or a partner, and it's about yourself, and it's like, but I listened to this conversation and I'm not getting, how has he got it? And you know, I have. To me, that kind of is like what I think comes out of this example for me is that somewhere in him he knew this was the conversation to listen to. And what for me that does is just kind of invites, like, whoever it is, whoever you are, if you're here listening, even if you're kind of going, yeah, but everything hasn't changed for me yet, something in you knows this is the conversation to sit in. And funnily enough, yesterday we have a family WhatsApp chat group. And we got a message first thing yesterday from my cousin who lives out in Spain that ended up in the family chat that just said something entirely in Spanish, and then his mom responded and put wrong group, and you know, I translated it because I'm nosy, and it was just about some orders for work, but because he lives in Spain, he's English, and I think he's lived out there probably about 10-12 years, something like that. But we were kind of then having a conversation because Deb kind of said, oh, I didn't know he spoke kind of fluent Spanish. And then we had a conversation about language, and for me it's like, we don't need to learn a language, we just sit in that language, and it kind of by osmosis we hear it, we see something. Because I don't feel like my cousin, in the years he's lived in Spain, has gone out and learnt Spanish. His wife speaks fluent Spanish, his child does. He works in Spain, you know, he's just surrounded by this language all the time. Speaking and sharing. And at some point, he probably just started speaking and went, oh yeah, it turns out I know some Spanish. And for me, I think that's how this conversation works too. And that's definitely what I've seen with Deb's son. It's like, just by being in and around this, something in him has gone, oh yeah, I get it. I see what you're pointing to. So for me, that's what kind of comes out of this, whether it's you or someone else you're looking at. It's like, this conversation is kind of in some ways a language that speaks to our heart. And if we keep listening, something at some point we'll get it. We'll be like, oh yeah, that's it, I know. And I'm sure there's conversations my cousin can't have in Spanish. I'm sure there's bits of the conversations that, I don't know what was going on there. But what we do know is the bits where he does know that language, it makes a difference in his life. And the same for Deb's son. It's like, the bits that he has now seen, that is making a difference.
And I think we've all seen something. This is very often, we say things, this isn't a place to get to. It's an uncovering something that's already there.
Yeah.
It's already in you. It's part of your makeup. It is who you are. So on some level, everybody absolutely already knows this. And it is just a realization of something that we already know.
Yeah. So in case it's not obvious, who is your loving this week, Deb?
Yeah, I think my loving this week is absolutely Josh. Yes, so very, very proud mum moment, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're allowed that one. So my living and learning this week has been a really interesting one, because many of you will know, and we've already talked about the 5-day challenge we've got next week. One of the things that Deb and I do in this conversation regularly is kind of challenge ourselves, and whenever something is going on, there's a curiosity in, I'm going to speak for myself, I'm presuming it's similar for Deb, but I'll just speak for me. In my own mind, there's a curiosity. When something is going on for me, if it's something that I'm like, I don't like this so much, it's uncomfortable, or it's not, doesn't feel like it's where I want to be or who I want to be, then I just find myself being curious about that. And I noticed over the last couple of weeks, there was a project I started with a small group of people that actually started from a conversation I was having at our conference back in November. And over the month since November, it's just slowly kind of taken a leap forward. And I'm working with a group. There's 6 of us in the group, and we've set up our own CIC, community interest company, so that some of the work we share can be done through kind of sponsorship and donation and that kind of thing. And what I noticed is, when I first had that conversation, and it was like a discussion with one of our speakers at the conference, I loved the idea of doing a CIC. It sounded like a great plan. I had such fantastic ideas for how that would, fit with what we share, work with alongside our conference and other projects. And then I've noticed over the last few months that I've been getting a lot of feelings of, that kind of, oh, do I have to? And emails have been pinging around, and people said, can you do this? Can we do that? Can we have them? And I've just noticed this kind of icky feeling of, oh, do I have to go to that meeting? Do I have to do that task? I haven't got time for this. And those kinds of feelings and thoughts. And I had a phone call yesterday with one of the people that's kind of part of that group. And I noticed as I picked up the phone, I had that feeling of, oh, what now? What am I going to have to do now? What's next with this? And what I love about this conversation is that I know that none of that speaks about the people or the project. None of that is indicative that the people or the project are not nice or too demanding or not the project I should be working on. All it's telling me is I've got some low quality thinking at the moment. And so yesterday, when I had that phone call, I noticed within a couple of minutes my mind was doing that curious thing. How is it that 6 months ago, when you started this, you were really hyped up about it and it looked like a good idea, it felt amazing, you loved the people you were going to be sharing this project with? How is it that all of a sudden you decided you don't like this project, you don't want to be doing it, you feel kind of overwhelmed with some of the tasks you've got? What's going on here? Why are you having that perspective now? Why are you seeing it that way? What's the deal here? Is that how you want to turn up to this project? Do you want out of the project? Is that what's going on? And I just had this curious conversation with myself to see whether, because there are times when we take stuff on and then think, no, that's not actually for me. And I just wanted to be interested if that was what was going on, because I can see if it was, then stepping out of the project might have been better for the project. So I was really kind of playing around with, where is this going for me? Is there something here that I need to do differently? And I just, over the course of the day, I just was having this ongoing conversation. What, is this CIC where I want to be? Is it a project I want to turn up? And if I'm going to stay in, do I want to turn up 100% and make it something that, I give everything to, give, what I can to it? And just played around in that conversation all day. And last night we had a meeting with the group of people, our first official kind of meeting with everybody. And it was a really nice meeting. And I noticed as I went into that meeting that my feelings about the whole CIC had changed. Something had shifted. And I hadn't had to do anything besides the being curious. That was kind of my part in that. And I noticed, this is a project I'm keen on. This is something I want to be on board with. This is something that's going to become kind of one of my babies that I want to grow with. I don't know what that funny feeling and thinking was doing. It was just having a little play with me for some reason. But it's not where I'm actually at with this project. So I'm just going to let it go. I'm not going to engage with that thinking. I'm going to turn up to this project with that kind of enthusiasm that I know I can turn up with on other things that I work on. And it was so interesting to me as we had that meeting, the stuff that was coming up for me of like, I'm going to make sure that happens. I'm taking on the Facebook group to make sure that, I like this idea. That's an interesting one. Shall we talk? And we had a really nice meeting with us.
Really nice, yeah.
And nothing had changed for me other than I was curious to see if that was really, if there was information in the feeling or not. And that kind of invitation is just always there. That feeling wasn't telling me those people weren't a good group of people or the CIC wasn't a good idea. It was just telling me about my thinking, and I didn't have to engage in it. And the minute I got curious, I stopped engaging in it and new thought came. And it just gave me a brand new experience. And I've already kind of been playing around with the project this morning going, what am I going to do next on this? I'm really excited about where this can go and how we can kind of as a group work together.
I love that, like the quote that Sid said, if all we learn was not to be frightened of an experience, that would change the world. And I think in times like that, when I look about getting curious with Josh and his own wisdom, very much the experience that I was having was quite a frightening one, as in, I've got to trust my son here. Sometimes he says crazy things, he does crazy things, and I've got to trust he has his own wisdom. And that experience didn't, the thinking that I was having around that wasn't a good feeling. It's like, no, I don't want, sorry, I don't want this. And then for me, it is seeing there's nothing frightening in that experience. And if I am not frightened of having that experience, and if I'm not frightened of having that experience again and again and again, then what does it matter? And definitely then getting curious, and from that place of seeing there's nothing in my experience to be frightened of, and then I can get curious about it, it opens up the possibility that, maybe he has got his own wisdom. And turns out he has. Turns out we all have. But sometimes, definitely, I can have the experience that other people haven't got their own wisdom. But it's a really interesting one, isn't it?
And that literally only happened yesterday. And over the course of it, I just kind of watched what was happening around it and thought, I'm just going to see what turns up in the next couple of weeks around this project. So I think it's fair to say that my loving this week is the Web of Wellbeing CIC and the team. And if you're interested to know kind of what we're up to, you can visit the website webofwellbeing.org. But forgive us because that's still a little bit of a work in progress. Quite early
it's an
days.
ongoing project.
So there's enough on there to kind of whet your appetite and see what we're up to. And give us a shout if you like what we're up to and if there's anything you want to know
to get involved at all. It would be great.
Yeah, so I'm back on board. I'm really excited about it. I just watched my thinking go, she's not engaging, so we're just going to drop this and move on.
And I think that's one of the key points, isn't it? That being frightened of our own thinking and our own experience gets us deeper and deeper into it. We're just allowing the experience to be. It just passes.
Yeah, I really saw that.
Cool. That is brilliant. Lovely. So on to our question. What to do when my thoughts look real?
Mm.
That is a really, really great question. And I think to start with, for me, what I want to share in that is that whole going back to what we talk about within this understanding that our lives are made up with, we experience thought in the moment. That is how we experience life. So when we kind of say what to do when our thoughts look real, the first thing for me is to sort of point out that every experience we have is an experience of thought, and it can really, really, really look as if there is something outside of that. And to me, when my thinking looks real, it isn't that my thinking, well, there's two things that can happen. What I see since I've been around this understanding is sometimes my thinking looks real, whereas before I was in this conversation, it used to look to me that there was something. I didn't realize it was my thinking. It just looked real. I would not have described it that my thinking looks real. I would have described this real situation that I'm in. And I think that is a huge shift and a huge difference. So I think the first thing to kind of talk about around this is that, you know, that place where if something is looking real to you, does it look like a real thing that has nothing whatsoever to do with thought, or does it look like some scary thinking in that moment? And I think seeing that is huge. Seeing that I'm being frightened by some very scary thinking in this moment, that's a whole different experience. So if you're listening to this, if you're hearing this, and you know, there's this whole thing about, yeah, I can see sometimes my thinking looks scary, and that's one whole thing. But what about this real thing that's going on out in the world now? What about this real thing that's happening to me? And definitely a huge shift for me was seeing, oh, that's thought too, however real it looked. One of the things with my son, one of the fears that I lived with, my son went through a stage of being suicidal, and he would talk to me about his suicidal thinking and what he might do, and it was a very real thing to me. And seeing that whole trusting that he has his own wisdom and his journey is his to do, that it's like the fact that he would talk like that, the fact that he would do that, it was, that to me looked real. You know, it looked like, that's not to do with my thinking. What if that happens? What's that got to do with thought? How is that anything to do with thought? And then I had a realization that I had the thought that some things shouldn't happen. You know, that should not happen. And for me, it was looking at that and seeing that was made up in my thinking, that certain things shouldn't happen in the world. Now, if that is a huge jump for you, if you're listening to that and go, well, it shouldn't, you know, people should not commit suicide, it shouldn't happen. What I have really, really seen is that when we put a stand against things like that, things that actually in this world that we live in do happen, that is when we feel that pain. That is when we get into trouble. And somehow the accepting that those kinds of things do happen in this world, they do. And when we see that, somehow that is the best way to prevent those things from happening. And it sounds a bit crazy, but this morning, when we got up this morning, when I went out to, as some of you might know, that Bec and I are hugely into our garden. So it was a really nice morning this morning. So I got up and had my breakfast, and then I thought, I'd go outside and I'm going to just have a look around the garden. It was a really lovely morning. So I opened the back door, and yesterday we'd emptied the bin and we put a black bag of rubbish just outside our back door. So I opened the back door to go and see our beautiful garden, and what met my eyes was this black bag torn apart, and all the rubbish from the last week, all those horrible things that you never want to see again from the last week, was strewn outside the door. And there wasn't a pleasant smell particularly, and it didn't look pleasant. So straight away my thinking says to me that shouldn't have happened. And it didn't feel nice. It didn't come with a nice feeling, or there was nothing nice about it. And I got a little bit curious about that, and I looked at that and I thought, well, obviously it should have happened because it has happened. What if I am perfectly okay with the fact that it has happened? And then I just kind of got my gardening gloves, got a black bag, picked it all up, put it in the bag, and it was all good. And it's one of those places, if none of that makes sense to you, play with it. Look at it for yourself. Because what we see in those moments, what we were talking about at the beginning of this, what I first started this call with when I said about my son, he has seen something in that. He has seen, oh yeah, if I am okay with that rubbish being strewn across there, if I see that it has happened, so it's okay that it's happened, and it's perfectly okay to just pick up that rubbish. That's when something in us shifts and changes. So just kind of get playful and curious with that. I don't know what you're...
Yeah, the thing that's kind of coming to me around the question, what to do when my thoughts look real. It's been a very, very long time since I watched this film, so I'm going to just talk about it in a real kind of rough outline. But there's a film called The Truman Show, with Jim Carrey, I think, is the main actor in it, isn't he? And it's a story, and it kind of starts off with this guy, and it kind of follows his life, and you're just watching his life unfold, and certain things happen, and sometimes they seem to be really good, and other times it's like, oh, that wasn't so great, how did that kind of happen? And at some point during the film, he starts to get suspicious about his life. It's like, something isn't right here in my life. And eventually kind of what kind of comes round in the film is that he's actually in a reality TV show. He doesn't know this, but he's part of a reality TV show, and his whole life is being managed by the production company, and they do all sorts of things like, clear the traffic off the road so he can get to work quickly, and just they manage everything. So every part of his life is being kind of watched over by this TV company, and people across the world are watching his life, and he has no idea. It's a bit of a weird film, actually, but the kind of point of it is that at some point he realizes something isn't right, and he starts to go a little bit further afield. Like, he only spends his life in a very small kind of area without even realizing that's happened, and he starts to look further afield, and eventually comes across this wall, and there's a door in the wall, and he kind of opens the door, and it's like, that's the point to me that we get to when we play around in this conversation. For most of his life, he just thought, this is his life, this box was his life.
Yeah.
And at some point he got suspicious and interested and curious, and he found there was a door, and there was a lot more going on outside of that. And that's how it is with thought. For that period of time where we think it is just this, and it's solid, and that's all that it is, we're just going to live with this. And when we start to get a little bit suspicious, we look a bit further afield, and we kind of go, what if it isn't just this? What if there's more here? What if there's something else available to me? And as soon as we start to do that, it's amazing what comes. And I know one of the things that I do, I've been around this conversation quite a while. It mostly feels to me like I see through thinking. I see that stuff is thought, but there must be places where I just don't know.
I'm sure
I just don't know
all of
that
us.
I'm in the Truman Show. There must be places like that for me still. So I am kind of a bit like my kind of living and learning. When something's happening to me, I just kind of put it out there. What am I not seeing? What if there's something here that looks like a solid experience to me? And what if I could see it differently? I'm open to seeing it new, and just invite kind of life, the universe, God, to share something different with me. And one of the other ways that I love talking about this, one of my metaphors that I came up with a while back that seems to really hit home for quite a few people, is the idea of a kind of solid concrete or brick wall.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what thought first appears as. And especially if we're kind of newer around this conversation, and there's areas in our lives that are kind of a bit uncomfortable, they can appear like a solid brick wall. If you've come up to a solid brick wall and there's no way over it, under it, round it, through it, then it can feel like that's what thought is doing, and we don't even know that that's happened. it's just solid in front of us, and we walk away and go, I've got to, go backwards and do something else here. And what happens for me when I get kind of that curiosity and that sort of suspicious, I'm inviting the universe to show me something here. I'm looking at that brick wall, curious to know if there's actually a gate or a door or a crack or anything at all that might be available to me, to just start to see if there's any possibility that that brick wall actually isn't a solid brick wall. And it is exactly like Deb was just saying, it's that playful curiosity, that playful invitation to see something. Because what happens when we do that is life changes.
It does, in ways that we didn't believe that
hadn't
it could,
even known that it was possible.
We see through something.
Yeah, and that's all I was doing when I was talking about the CIC. It's like, I've got it set up here that this project is becoming a pain and something that's additional to what I want to do in my life. What if that isn't a solid brick wall? What if that can actually be a project I really enjoy and get a lot out of and put a lot into? Is that available here? Or is this a solid brick wall? I'm interested to know. I just don't know. What if what if one of those bricks can be removed? Is that possible? And that is all that's ever going on. When we're saying, this is a real situation in my life, this is a real thing that's happening in my world, in the world, in my partner's world, what if that isn't as solid as I make it? That's the only question I ever really ask in some form or another. What if this isn't as solid as I'm looking at it and saying it is?
And it's really, really interesting, because when we look at things in that way, like you said, this is a real thing that's happening. This is happening in my world, in the world, in whatever. It looks like it's bigger than us, and this is something that's really happening. And it can absolutely look as if just having a different thought about it can't change it. It maybe can't happen because that's how it is, and having a different thought about it won't change it. But it's really very much that playful curiosity is where we begin to see cracks in that. And it's really cool how our mind plays these tricks on us ourselves, because I've watched myself do that, see something differently, and then go back to, then go through that process again with something else and think, oh no, this one isn't thought, this is absolutely real. And our mind is brilliant at playing that trick on us. And again, it's just that curiosity that, well, what if it's possible that there's something else to see here? Because what we have begun to, well, certainly for myself, what I've begun to really see is that life out there comes through me. Everything that I see out there, however real and solid that it looks, that it is nothing to do with me, that there is a world going on there that I am separate from, and that has nothing to do with me. And my change of thought cannot change that world. That is what it is, and then I will have thinking about that situation. But what I am coming to see more and more is that world out there comes through me. And as my thoughts change, the world isn't a solid thing that is there and then I am experiencing it. I am creating that world via this experience that I'm having. So it's a whole different game that we're actually playing, which is why, if we are prepared to get curious, if we are prepared to look and to see if there is something else there that we can see, you will see something else. And I don't know what that will be, but I do know that it is life-changing. It's where freedom lies. It's where we as human beings, it's where our evolution is going. It's where all this stuff that's going on in the world right now, it's where it's going to be cleared up when we open our minds in that way.
And I know for me, like when we kind of talk about the getting curious or being playful with this, we can sometimes in our mind go, well, I'm going to get curious about the most difficult, awkward, painful situation in my life, or, pick an example that you think, well, it can't work here. And what we're kind of saying with this being curious is start with something a little less emotive, a little easier, a bit like, when you're learning to drive, you start with the quiet side roads. You don't go straight out onto the 6-lane motorway kind of thing. So it's the same in this, really. It start with something that looks fairly harmless, and if you don't see something there, it's not going to have a massive kind of impact on you.
Like when I was talking about my son and stuff, it didn't come to me straight away about his suicide. It was very much the topic of the rubbish. That's a great one to kind of just play around with. You know, when I opened the door today and I saw all the rubbish there, it's those kinds of things. It's straight away you get really like, oh, for goodness sake, what kind of creature is doing that? How annoying is that it happens? Get curious with that. Because what happens is when we get curious in those places, when those real situations, that's absolutely what happened for me. I got curious about stuff like rubbish and my plants not thriving in the way that I wanted them to, and just stupid things that really don't matter one way or the other. And then in those moments when it feels heart-wrenching, when it feels this is too much, our minds opened in ways that we see things in those places too. But I don't think it's our job, like you say, to jump in there straight away. It is getting curious about something that really doesn't matter.
Yeah, and like one of the examples I was going to share is, for me, I know one of the kind of, it's a story I have, but it's, for the longest time it was very solid, and it's not as solid now, but it's a story that I stick with because I quite enjoy it. But I can see the places where there are times when it's not a helpful story. And the story is this: before my cup of tea in the morning, don't talk to me, don't look at me, don't expect anything from me. I'm a zombie. I'm a dead zone.
It's true. It's not a story.
It's fairly solid, isn't it? But what I've kind of seen around that, and what sort of happened, and something amazing happened yesterday, which kind of just brought this home to me again, is that just, it isn't true. I'm a perfectly capable human being, whether it's pre or post cup of tea in the morning. It's just my preference to have my cup of tea before I have to kind of turn up as a human being. And most of the time I get to live my preference. But yesterday morning, something quite fun happened to me.
Yeah.
And it really kind of just immediately showed me how made up that story is, that I need my cup of tea. So I get up in the morning and I usually make a cup of tea for me and for Lucy. And I come down and I kind of put the kettle on, and I do, while the kettle's boiling, I'll do something like go to the toilet or just go and check our little babies in the utility room and
our plants.
Sorry, I forgot you might not know our babies are our plants. We don't keep actual babies in the utility. Our little baby plants, so while the kettle's boiling, I just wander into the utility. And because of where our utility sits in our house, the window on the side of it looks out onto kind of what is the back door and our patio. And as I looked out of the window, there was a big parcel sat outside the back door. It was quite a tall parcel. And I could see the thing on it, and it had my partner's name and our address. And I was like, why has he had a parcel delivered to my house? What's he up to? So I obviously go and open the back door, all the while the kettle's still boiling. I've had no tea yet, so I'm in zombie mode. I'm opening the back door, kind of pulling this parcel in, looking at it. And because of the way the parcel was kind of packaged, I could sort of just see in the top. And it looked suspiciously like a plant. So I thought, right, I'm opening this. This is clearly for me. I'm opening it. So I open. So I'm sitting there and ripping this box open, looking through it, opening, and I open the label, and it's got a thing that says, this is for your garden. So at that point I realised it is for me. It's just forgotten to change the name, but that's fine. So I've opened all of this.
It wasn't small.
No, it was bigger than this screen. So, and in there, these two beautiful potted plants. They're proteas, and they're flowers that I really like, and my partner likes. And he sent them to me. And all this time, I think at some point during this, I probably poured the kettle water onto the tea bags, and I've sort of half made the tea and I'm half opening the package. And by the time it's practically open, I'm sitting with my tea in my hand, and the thought occurs to me, oh, isn't that funny how much I've managed to do before I've even had my tea? When my story is, I don't do anything, I don't talk to anyone, and nothing happens unless I've had my morning cup of tea. And it's just, for me, it's that seeing those moments where, you know, it's not 100% rule that I have to have a tea before I can turn up and do anything in life. And it's just seeing that it's my preference. I love my morning cup of tea. I like kind of getting up and not having to attend to life until I've had my tea intake. But knowing that there are times, and that was a fun one yesterday, but there are other times, you know, where life calls me to action before I've managed to get a cup of tea. And I can be perfectly okay and capable in that moment.
And it's really interesting, because my story is I have to be showered, dressed.
Yeah,
I do everything. I'm the exact opposite. I don't choose to have a cup of tea. I would not want. My story is I can't have a cup of tea until I'm all dressed and up and sorted downstairs and having it with my breakfast. So it's really, and so whatever stories, they're fun stories to look at and to see how solidly we hold them, and to notice that we can do that to our detriment with some stories.
And the reason I kind of use that example is it's fairly harmless. You know, no one that I know of has ever been harmed in the making of Bec's cup of tea, you know, apart from maybe a slightly grumpy look. But for the most part, that's one of those places that it looked for the longest time like a completely solid story to me. And now it's more like it's a preference. And most of the time I get to live that preference, which is great. That's fantastic. But when there's times when I can't, or something happens and it kind of pulls me in it, and I'm like, oh, I want to open my parcel. How great is it that I have that flexibility? And that's the invitation.
And it's interesting to see and to see what stories we hold about ourselves, like the I'm shy, or I'm loud, or I'm whatever it is. We have all sorts of I'm. I'm not a morning person, or I am a morning person. It's really interesting to see that those things just aren't true, because we all have those same capacities, don't we? To do whatever before our cup of tea, after our cup of tea, not have a cup of tea at all, not have one till lunchtime. We have the capacity for all sorts of things. And I guess that's what the invitation here is, to get curious, because then in those moments when life appears very, very serious and very, very real, we have all sorts of capacity there too. And I think this conversation is about opening our mind to see that and to see how helpful that can be. And I think that brings us really, really perfectly, could have been planned, into our topic, conflict resolution and resiliency. Because I think there we were really touching on that resiliency, you know, how much. Another way that I think about resiliency is bounce back ability. And as human beings, we have that built into our system. And I know for the longest time in some organizations that I worked with, and some people that I used to have conversations with, it felt like resiliency was something we needed to build. Our resilience, we needed to do something so that we could be resilient. And some people looked as if they weren't resilient, and some people looked as if they were, and it appeared that some people were more resilient than other people. And what I've seen since I've been around this conversation is that all of us have the exact amount of resilience that we need. It's like one of those, like a story that I used to listen to when I was little was a magic porridge pot, and it would just be that it kept making porridge and it kept making porridge, and I think it actually had too much. But the point that I'm making here is, as human beings, it's like it's something that we have on tap is resilience. That if we don't need it, the tap's turned off and we're fine, we're going about our lives. And then if something happens and we need some bounce back ability, just the exact amount. If we need a big bit, we've got a big bit. If we need a little bit, we've got a little bit. It's just something that we all have access to all the time in the exact amount that we need it. And what we were talking about before, those stories that we make up about ourselves, that, you know, I can't have resilience before I've had my cup of tea in the morning. When we believe those stories about ourselves, we can struggle sometimes then to find the resilience, because it's like the story is like this. It's like a black cloud over the sun, and it can look as if the sun has gone. But in the same way that even if there is the worst storm in the world and the sky is black, the sun can't have gone anywhere. It can really look as if it had, but if you think about this planet that we live on, you know, you think about how it all works. If the sun had genuinely gone somewhere, we wouldn't even be here to get curious about that. We would be gone. We would be done.
We wouldn't even know about it.
No, we wouldn't know about it. So if we're thinking, oh, the sun has gone, it hasn't, because we couldn't do that. And it's the same. If we're thinking we haven't got resilience, if we still have the capacity to think that we haven't got resilience, we must have it, because otherwise the capacity to think would also be gone, because something fundamental would be different in our makeup. And so again, it's one of those things to get curious about it in exactly the same way. And if we look at human beings and how they work, I saw on Facebook the other day something, and I've seen it shared time and time again, and a friend who actually shared it, she'd shared it before and was saying, I just love this. And I can't remember who the man is, but there's a picture of a man, and he's got prosthetic, is that the right word?
Yeah.
Legs. He hasn't got, he's lost his legs. And somebody's kind of asked him the question, how can you be so happy and okay with your life when you haven't got legs? And he says back, how can you be so miserable with your legs? And it's like, that's the thing to me, that points to the resilience that we have.
Yeah. So I'm going to share a little story which I think to me points to resilience, and then I think with the other half of our topic we'll come on to after that, conflict resolution. So you will know, probably if you've seen anything of ours in the last 3 months, that we are into the garden, like as I mentioned earlier about our babies and the utility and my plants that turned up yesterday. One of the things that I a long time ago, I can't remember for why, I grew a sunflower from seed, and it's always been in my mind to do that again. I love what happened when I did that many years ago. So as part of our garden project this year, I've grown some sunflowers from seed, and I don't know why, I don't know what it is about them, but they just became my absolute treasures, and I really fell in love with them. I was very proud of how tall they were getting, and they finally went out into the big wide world, and we planted them out in the garden probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago now.
They're huge.
And they're pretty big, and they're looking very promising. And then during the last week, we've had some very, very windy weather.
We have.
And I think just because the way our house and garden is designed, where a lot of our garden sits, the wind kind of whistles through the kind of patio area. And we'd looked a couple of times and sort of thought, I'm going to need to put bigger sticks on those sunflowers. They're quite rocky.
Too big for their sticks.
Yeah, and just because of what was kind of going on and the stuff I was doing, I was like, right, I'll do that. And I had in mind, I'll get to that tomorrow, because that's just not going to fit today. And before tomorrow came round, my biggest sunflower just went, and it looked like it had completely snapped, didn't it? It was folded over entirely in half.
It was one of those moments.
Oh, it was a real moment. I had a real moment of, oh, that has happened. What now?
Am I okay even?
Yeah,
here?
and I definitely had those moments, exactly like Deb was kind of saying earlier with the rubbish and stuff in the garden. It's like, this shouldn't have happened. I put so much love and attention into growing these.
Both a little bit heartbroken.
And it was my biggest one, and and everything about it. And I had to, we were off out somewhere when I kind of had seen that it happened. So I had to just walk away and go out and kind of, I left it there and just didn't, in my mind it was a goner, but I just wasn't ready to accept that. It certainly
looked like it was
like, that's
gone.
It's gone. But I can't accept it, so I'm just going to walk away right now. And we went off and did what we did. And when we kind of came back, I went over to talk to him and tell him I was sorry and kind of put him to rest. And as I looked, a little tiny piece of his stalk was actually still attached.
There wasn't an absolutely clean snap, was it?
There was still some attachment there. And what kind of came to me was that we talk a lot about kind of how resilient we are, and as human beings, how we're designed, and just things like, if you cut your finger, it will stitch itself back together. If you break a bone, as long as you kind of hold it fairly tightly kind of together, the bone will re-knit itself. And it kind of came to me, we are nature, and so is this sunflower. I wonder if there's a built-in resiliency in this sunflower too. So I kind of picked him up very gently, stood him back up together, you know, pieced him back together, got some garden kind of string, wrapped it round, not too tight, but kind of tight enough to hold him in one piece, put a very beautiful bow on him, stood him back up, and then just had a really nice conversation with him and kind of said, you know, we're all resilient, we're all part of nature, we're all this same design. If it's in you and you want to, let's kind of knit back together, and kind of just left him to see whether he wanted to knit back together, which is starting to sound a little bit crazy having a conversation. But it's amazing that energy that kind of comes through us when we have those conversations. To me, that's just part of the energy that we are here. And I was kind of I was just allowing that to come through me. That was what was there in that moment. And over the last, so it's probably been about a week since he snapped, hasn't it? I think.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Or 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
And for the first day, it really looked like he
definitely, his leaves wilted. It looked like he was dying. I think he was. I think he was dying.
Yeah. But in the last couple of days, he has perked right back up. There's a couple of leaves that I think
we've lost a couple of leaves.
Maybe
definitely, I think they're not going to make it. But the top of him and his top leaves, it was like interestingly, you came into the kitchen one day and me and Russ were there.
Oh yeah.
And you said, I need a second opinion. I need you to go and look at the sunflower and tell me, because you said, I don't know whether I'm
seeing him coming back to life, because that's what I want to happen. Yeah. And I need a more neutral opinion. And can someone go and have a look and see?
And interestingly, Russ and I had been out and looking at the sunflower earlier, and both of us had said, it's gone. It's not going to make it. The leaves were really, really wilted. It looked like the whole thing just looked like it was dying. Yeah. And when you said that, I thought, oh gosh, it's dying. And then I thought, maybe I'm a little bit too attached to the sunflower. And I said, maybe Russ has got to give you his opinion.
So we sent Russ out to be neutral.
And I went out with Russ to have a look, and I was just amazed. I was like, oh gosh. No, it's actually coming back. And I think for a while it did.
I think died off. Had a moment of, I think, come out of the game.
It definitely, it went downhill. It was poorly, wasn't very well, but it's come back. And we'll share the flower with you. We'll take a picture of the flower when it comes. And it's a beautiful example of resiliency, and the fact that we are that system. We are the same. Our bones do knit back together, and psychologically we are wired to have new thought, and new thought changes any situation. It's just how it works. It looks crazy, it looks too simple, but when we have a different thought about something, it is different. We don't get a different view of it. It is different. And it's mind-blowing to have realizations about that and to see that.
And actually, I think that is the very crux of conflict resolution, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That it's what happens when there appears to be some kind of conflict is it looks like, the person or the situation or whoever it is I feel I'm in conflict with, it looks like that has to change. And what I kind of see, and as you were saying that about that new thought doesn't change my perspective on it. That new thought changes whatever it is. It's as simple as that. And I think we can get very kind of, that person has to change and I'll meet them halfway. And it's like, actually, no, go all of the way. When you have a new thought, you can go all of the way. Because that is, for me, that is where conflict resolution comes from. The only way to resolve a conflict of any description is for me to have new thought. When I get a different thought about something, that conflict is gone. It's resolved. There's nothing I have to do. I have an entirely new life in front of me in that moment. The minute I have a new thought, that conflict does not exist anymore. It's resolved. It's gone. There is nothing I need to do. I just turn up now and be me from that new place. And I think we can very much get into that. Goes right back to me, to that story. I actually read it out in my blog this week. So if you've had our newsletter today, go and watch it. But it's the story of when people turn up for a picnic at a riverside, and there's people kind of falling into the river, and they're having to pull them out and pull them out and pull them out. When that it's like a couple that are picnicking, I think, and they're helping people out of the river. One of them goes upriver, finds a bridge where people are falling in, and stops them falling in, you know, kind of puts up a sign, and that's it. Conflict resolved. There is no more people falling in the river. When we go back to what's causing that situation, that conflict, it's our thinking, it's our feeling, it's what we're believing to be true is creating that conflict. And as soon as we move upriver, it's gone.
And sometimes, you know, we can be really, really solid in what looks true to us, that this has to be different. And you can see it from the smallest things, like the rubbish we were talking about, you know, when I opened the back door and all this, that rubbish was there, or when the sunflower snapped, and it's like, this cannot be like this. I can't stand it being like this. And sometimes we can be so sure that we are right, we don't even consider the option that we could have a different thought about this. And yet true conflict resolution is seeing that human beings, seeing yourself, knowing that you are wired, you are designed, you will have a new thought about this, and knowing that that is an option, seeing that that is an option. And people who do well in life, people who thrive in life, know this. And it is a case of seeing that that is true for you, and that you have your own wisdom, and you can trust that new thinking, and not making up your mind that this has to be this way, it has to happen in this way. Because all a conflict is when two people come together with an idea that I am right and I am right, and that neither one can see something different. And once one person, and this again goes back to everything we teach about relationships, it feels like when you have a conflict like that, it can really look, when we're talking about this, it can look like both people need to see something different. What if that's not true? That's another thing to get curious about. What if that is not true? What if only one person needs to see something different? And if you're here and you're in this conversation and you're hearing this, what if that person could be you? And it's amazing what we see when we open our minds like this. And it's not that we have the answer, we know what you're going to see but if you are in a conflict of any kind, if you get curious, and you don't even necessarily have to get curious about what it is you're in a conflict about, just get curious about how your mind works, get curious about how life works, and trust me, you will be amazed at what can happen. And I think if all of us would look in this direction and get curious in that way, there wouldn't be any conflict. And the only person that can ever start with is you. And that is enough. That is the paradox of, if everybody did it, what if I just do it? And that is enough.
Yeah. Just to finish off, maybe earlier I think it was towards the end of last week, I saw a post on Facebook, somebody kind of talking about the quote, be the change you want to see in the world, and how they'd kind of, it had become a quote for a lot of people that we just kind of, you know, it just rolls off our tongue without really thought.
We don't stop really and actually think,
seeing it.
Yeah, we don't see it anymore.
And the way they'd kind of written this post was really kind of getting back to, what is that really telling me? And that was what was coming to me as you were just sharing that, about really the only person that has to see something different here for conflict to be resolved is you or me, you know, and that, you know, I'm talking to me now.
Yes.
And it's that quote, be the change you want to see in the world. That's me. I need to be the change that I want to see in the world. And that's the only place that can start. And I think I've really seen that quote anew this last week.
It's really, when we stop and actually listen, that is the thing. There are some absolutely beautiful quotes, but our mind is really, really great at just going, yeah, I know that. Yeah, skipping it. Right. Yeah, I've seen that. And it is actually take a breath and see these quotes afresh. See what Sid shared. If we just learn not to be afraid of our experience. Be the change we want to see in the world. If we actually take a breath and hear those with our heart, not just with our head, I think that's where change happens, isn't it?
For sure. So I think that's a nice place to kind of finish the topic for today.
That was a great show. Thanks, Bec. And next week, what have we got coming next week?
So our question next week is, why is self-love important? Which fits surprisingly nicely with our 5-day self-love challenge, which is happening next week. And our topic next week is thriving in this crazy world. Exciting. Can't wait to see what we come up with for that one.
Absolutely not.
So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll make sure there's links below so you can sign up to the 5 days self-love. We'd love to see you on that.
We would, absolutely. And if you ever want to dive more deeply into this conversation with us personally, we do mentoring, and feel free to get in touch and inquire about that.
Yeah, please do. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.